Hello to you, Mr. Straw. Thanks for joining us. I did put it to Mr. Cleverly about what we have said and what China might have said to us. Tell us how those back channels work, especially in a situation like this, when we are trying to get them to stay out of a war that could make the difference between tens of thousands of people dying and not.
In any acute situation, it's essential to have what you describe as a back channel, and are indeed called back channels. So those are confidential conversations between diplomats who are trusted on each side, and also have to trust each other. And typically, I mean, they take place completely away from scrutiny. I'll just give you one example. When President Obama wanted to re-establish some relationship with Iran, which led to the nuclear deal in 2015, there were 2 years of back-channel negotiations between American and Iranian officials, which were quite deniable, but which ensured that when they got to formal negotiations, they actually had more or less got it pre-cooked, as the saying goes in the diplomatic trade.
OK. What do you make of what you're hearing and the fact that China is saying, no, we're not involved at all, and how dare you suggest this? And the United States is saying, we can see what's going on. What role would you play if you were still the UK's Foreign Secretary? What would be happening behind the scenes?
Well, what I can see is that China has been looking at the situation. It has nothing particularly to thank the United States for. It's benefited hugely from the relaxation of trade restrictions, which took place 30 years ago. But the United States and the West benefits as much as China does from China's trade. And China is a great nation. And one of the things about both China and these days Russia is this sense that these are nations which were humiliated by the West. In China's case, were humiliated. In Russia's case, are being humiliated as a result of the collapse of the Berlin Wall and all that's happened 30 years is on. So they don't really feel they owe the West anything. On the other hand, the Chinese, above all, not stupid, far from it. And their prosperity does indeed depend on trade with the West, and only a tiny amount on trade with Russia, whose economy is so much smaller than it is China's. And of course, its population is so much smaller too. So the Chinese will be trying to work it out. And what I think they've now decided, or should have understood, is that this is a war that President Putin is not lost, but he's certainly not winning. And even if he does, quotes, win, it will be a Pyrrhic victory, which will be hollow. So that's what's going on there. The only, in my view, I mean, I think this is widely shared, the only man who could really push Putin into a corner, get him off this brutal, outrageous adventure of his, is the Chinese president. And that's, of course, important, for the West, for people like our Prime Minister and the United States President, to push with the Chinese as well.
Yeah. Mr. Straw, we're very lucky to have you on today because, of course, foreign affairs very much dominating the news headlines. We're hearing that our Prime Minister, is heading to Saudi Arabia later on today to talk about trying to source a different customer, a different client when it comes to oil, given the sanctions that we've got in place against Russia. But we know that the Saudis killed 81 people in one day on Saturday, or certainly this weekend. How can we do business with a country that we bring up their behaviour towards fellow human beings, and they continue to do it ever since your government was in power? Because, of course, you also did business with them. We
did. And it's true across the world that you're faced with these moral hazards. So the answer is, how do you do business in practice? Well, with a peg on your nose. But here's the problem, and then there will be people saying, well, just refuse to take Saudi oil. I mean, let me just point out too, by the way, that Texas the Lone Star State of the United States. It too executes a quite significant number of people, and with a very, very rickety criminal justice system, certainly compared to ours. So just point that out. And there is a relativism here. So when Iran, which is kills more people judicially than any other country, executes people if they ever announce this, there's huge condemnation around the world. If it's Saudi Arabia, it's muted. And if it's Texas on the whole, people say nothing about it. Anyway, how do you do it? We need Saudi oil. I also just say, as the world's waking up, we also need Iranian oil, and we need Venezuelan oil. And so you will have to see, not these things put aside altogether, but frankly, twin track negotiations. But in the case of Saudi Arabia, Iran and Venezuela, for example, those countries need hard currency. They want to sell more oil at the highest price they can, and they won't mind at all about putting Russia's nose out of joint if they can take a greater market share of things than of the oil and gas markets than does Russia. So that's what happens.
Okay, just looking at the figures, actually, apparently Texas executed 6 people last year. I take your point, but it's significantly fewer, than what Saudi Arabia got up to just over this weekend. Let me ask you finally, if I may, about fracking. Your previous constituency, of course, up there in Lancashire, very much in the heart of fracking territory. Quadrilla has to decide whether to start capping those wells or not, given the situation that we found ourselves in. Should we cap those wells nonetheless, or should we wait?
It depends on the geology. I mean, I've never been opposed in principle to fracking, and I've seen it operate elsewhere. And it's not. I mean, there's a huge amount of talk about what it does. In other countries where fracking is taking place, it's been perfectly okay. The difficulty is the geology of that part of Lancashire. And it did lead to a number of, very minor earthquakes. But you talk about an earthquake, you think of buildings tumbling down. Now it happens that there are many more natural earthquakes of that size than there have been caused by fracking. But nonetheless, you've got to understand it from the public's point of view. That there is real anxiety in that part of Lancashire about the geological effects and the effects on their own houses of fracking. So that's the issue for me. It's if you like, a practical one, rather than am I opposed in principle to fracking? Why should I be opposed in principle to fracking? It's another way of getting oil and gas out of the ground, and I'm very much in favour of all the climate change policies which my party is pursuing. But meanwhile, we need a lot of gas and oil.
We do. Former Foreign Secretary, we are out of time. It's always great to have you on the show. Do come back more often. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Thanks a lot.